Think to yourself, there's no place like home. There's no place like home.
There's no place like home. There's no place like home.
There is no place like home. Lazlo Toth's arrival to America exemplifies what it means to be home. That feeling of comfort and security you get when you arrive to a place you can finally be free. Free to be who you are and love what you do. After surviving the Holocaust, Lazlo Toth fought his way to New York with one mission: to scream, "I'm home!" Sadly, his euphoria was quickly drowned out by despair. America is unlike anything he expected. It is a hellish, godless, soulless pit where the roads are paved with shit and piss. It is a place that demands you not only assimilate, but annihilate every part of yourself that could be considered an outsider. Lazlo's journey is the blueprint for every immigrant story. The struggle between remaining loyal to your tribal identity and trying to accommodate this new national one. Through Lazlo, Brady Corbett's The Brutalist unpacks what it means to be an American. What does it look like to uphold its values, assimilate, and become successful? Lazlo arrives expecting to live without fear of persecution and shame. Little did he know after surviving one Holocaust, he would have to survive another, a spiritual one. To make it, he was going to have to fight like hell. His journey demonstrates how this tension between one's tribal and national identity ultimately comes down to what you interpret that identity to be, based on values and beliefs which uphold justice for all people. Lazlo's ability to keep fighting is what makes him an American, not his ability to mimic what he is told an American should be. Hello everyone and welcome back to Always Watching. Today we're discussing the masterpiece, The Brutalist. The movie follows architect Lazlo Toth, who comes to America to rebuild his life, career, and marriage after surviving the Holocaust. Stars Adrien Brody in easily the best performance of the year, and Guy Pearce, who is unrecognizable as this American psycho. The movie is divided into 3 parts. It begins with a man having survived the Holocaust and ends with a man having survived America. And I've divided my video into several parts, so please click on the description box down below to navigate. Lazlo arrives to America with literally nothing. Simply surviving and having made it to America was enough. He really came with no expectations other than the hope of one day being reunited with his wife and niece. He does his best to lay low, however it's not enough, and his refusal to fully assimilate leaves him stranded. Lazlo's journey is marked by his refusal to conform to other people's perceptions of what it means to be an American. His transformation is profound and it's largely spiritual and internal. He comes to America with hopes of escaping and hopefully healing from his trauma. Instead, he takes on a bunch of new traumas. Prior to the war, Lazlo was a renowned architect, known for creating sites that were beautiful, practical, and more importantly, very strong. Buildings are some of the last pieces standing and serve as a memorial for all those who were killed and forced out of their home. They also serve as a reminder for how easily a people can be displaced and erased. Lazlo's journey to becoming an American begins with reuniting with his cousin, who informs him that his wife and niece are alive. It's also the first glimpse Lazlo gets into what it takes to survive in this new country. At first, his cousin's success, as well as his wife, gives him hope that a better life is possible. His American cousin, Attila, at first super excited to see him, begins to grow weary of his presence. Lazlo becomes a constant reminder of everything he had escaped, and also a liability if he wants to maintain this facade he had worked so hard to build. He is married to a white woman from Connecticut who looks at him like he's about to blow their whole cover. She offers to fix his nose and even suggests he find a job when she notices that he's becoming a little bit too comfortable. No one ever tells Lazlo that he's not welcome here. They just hint at it by pointing out all his differences. His initiation into American culture begins when his cousin is commissioned by a rich man's son to redo his father's library. Prior to this job, Attila never really doubted Lazlo's talents. He never really questioned his designs. He assumes that his cousin's talents would just speak for themselves. He never feels to pitch or explain anything that Lazlo does. Not only was Lazlo's talent not obvious, it was offensive and shocking. And this is a running theme throughout the film. Immigrants like Lazlo brought a new way of looking at the world, and this was not something Americans were prepared for. In fact, it was pretty much at odds with what they were used to. From Lazlo's perspective, he's shocked at how little that most Americans knew about the world or even really cared about what was going on outside of their universe. Lazlo never really feels comfortable explaining or pitching his work to anyone. In Budapest, he was a renowned architect, and so he's not really willing to reintroduce himself to a market unfamiliar and, more importantly, unappreciative of his work. Lazlo's demeanor is something that increasingly triggers his new patron, Harrison Van Buren. How their relationship starts is exactly how it ends, in pain and humiliation. The relationship between Lazlo and Harrison really wonderfully illustrates this push and pull of trying to maintain your heritage while at the same time climatizing to a new place. The relationship between Lazlo and Harrison begins when Harrison commissions Lazlo to build a new community center to honor his late mother. He commissions Lazlo in public, surprising him with the offer and therefore forcing him to take it. Throughout the film, Harrison and Lazlo have these tits for tats. Lazlo constantly tries to equalize the relationship, whereas Harrison constantly tries to take control over it. Anytime Harrison steps out of line, he gaslights Lazlo into believing he could have done more to stop him. At first, Harrison manages to hide his condescension through cooperation. He gives Lazlo an impossible task and then tells him to put his name on it. The majority of the film focuses on the construction of this community center, which spans the duration of the movie. The success of this project is not in its completion, but in its design. Coming to America, all Lazlo has is his integrity and his vision, both of which are constantly tested by Harrison. And Harrison is one of those people that gives me like you're one of the good ones vibes. Like, he seems like the type of person that's willing to do you a favor, however will expect you to thank him for that favor until the end of time. Project is literally riddled with disaster after disaster. Although Harrison says he trusts Lazlo and respects him, he constantly tries to bypass him and undermine his authority. One of my favorite lines in this film is when Lazlo is explaining why he became an architect, and he states, "Is there a better description of a cube besides its construction?" And Americans are not really known for having taste, and trying to build something that's both efficient and beautiful was proving to be a lot more challenging than they imagined. Harrison dreams of creating this cultural hub. He loves the aesthetics of other countries, but not the histories or the people that come with it. And to become a cultural hub, I mean, you really have to be open to other cultures, something that Harrison is simply not. He never really probes Lazlo about what inspired his designs or what his experience was in Europe. As far as Harrison is concerned, his past is irrelevant, and he sees Lazlo almost as a blank slate he can project onto. And we don't know much about Harrison, but from what we can tell, he was raised by a single mother, and he didn't have much growing up. And it feels like he really struggled to get to where he is, or at least that's the story that he's created. And everything about Harrison feels like a caricature of an American. He has annihilated himself completely to make it in this country, and he's frustrated that Lazlo refuses to do the same. Lazlo gives Harrison this rare opportunity to stand out as a visionary, as a genius. And Harrison, everything about Harrison is the definition of a charlatan. Like, whenever he talks, it's as if we are listening to a Wikipedia page. And this is something that Lazlo's wife clocked early on. However, I will give Harrison some credit. I do think he understands people, and I think he's very good at taking advantage of them. He also does an excellent job of masking how dangerous he really is. He accepts Lazlo's family as if they are refugees, and their presence in his home makes him appear a lot more altruistic than he really is. And in some ways, they really do need each other. Without Harrison, Lazlo would unlikely ever get someone to fund his work. And outside of work, again, we don't really get much insight into Lazlo. We never get any flashbacks or any deep conversations about Lazlo's time in Europe. And neither Lazlo or Harrison try to draw on his past to elicit sympathy or attention from anyone. I think Lazlo does a very good job of not allowing Harrison to politicize his work. And the only insight we get into Lazlo's political beliefs is when he's explaining to Harrison why he became an architect. Lazlo believes his role in achieving justice and stimulating change are through his designs. By simply creating what he envisions, he can change the world, and this is why he gets very defensive whenever Harrison or anyone else tries to make any alterations. At one point he says, "There, it's mine again." Like, it's very important that if he's commissioned to do something, that the end result is exactly as he pictured. And I think when it comes to fighting injustice, there are so many avenues. Some people are born to protest, some people are born to write, become lawyers, etc. And I feel like Lazlo is such a great example for people who wonder what they can do to make an impact, and sometimes simply doing your job well is enough. As far as Lazlo is concerned, this community has been plagued by cruel, stupid, and most importantly, very ugly buildings. And he's here to start the process of replacing them with sites that can inspire and bring joy to everyone. Unfortunately, Harrison keeps interfering. And Lazlo, he goes through great lengths to complete his design exactly as he envisioned, even forfeiting his fee, which you think would inspire loyalty, instead just inspires resentment, particularly from Harrison's son, Harry. And I felt like the relationship between father and son wonderfully illustrates how the fight against injustice is never ending. Harry represents a new breed of hatred and prejudice that future generations will have to fight. The only difference between father and son is not willing to pander to Lazlo. As far as he's concerned, he's an employee that's costing them way too much money. And Harry's resentment towards Lazlo lies in the fact that Lazlo refuses to acknowledge him as his superior or his equal. And Lazlo recognizes that people like the Van Burens have built their wealth on the backs of people like him. Some of their concerns are valid regarding budget. However, if they just wanted a community center, they could have commissioned anyone to build it. Instead, they commissioned Lazlo for a reason, because Harrison wants to stand out. And more importantly, he picked someone who he really believed he could mold in his image. And I felt like Lazlo's struggle to complete this project really does mirror his struggle to assimilate and climatize to America, a process he hoped would go more smoothly when his wife and niece finally arrive. And the second half of the film is very much about Lazlo coming to terms with the death of his old identity and trying to piece together who he is now. From the beginning, Lazlo dreamed of being reunited with his family and hopefully restoring parts of himself that he lost during the war. When his wife and niece arrive, they are nothing like he remembers. His wife, Elizabeth Toth, suffers from osteoporosis due to famine. The reunion does not trigger the joy he was hoping. Instead, it triggers extreme anxiety. Every time he looks at her, he's reminded of what he survived, a sentiment shared by his cousin. Some part of Lazlo is very relieved to finally be around people who understand him for who he is, and then some part of him wants these people to go away. Their presence really does trigger Harrison, who starts to make fun of Lazlo for not being able to assimilate, and even hinting that they thought he had a mental illness for suggesting they existed in the first place. Lazlo's family is proof that there is life outside of the Van Buren household, and more importantly, proof of a world outside of America that threatens the status quo his family has benefited from for a century. Even if Lazlo got rid of his accent and started dressing like Harrison, the Van Burens would never ever respect him or see him as one of them. Ultimately, they just don't value the same things. Lazlo never talks about money or material possessions. Any success he has, Lazlo shares it with people who are also struggling for the same respect and dignity he is. We don't get much insight into Lazlo's relationship outside of his close friend Gordon, but I felt like this bond he has with Gordon really does exemplify this national identity that he's trying to form, one that's more inclusive and less elitist than Harrison's. The more time Lazlo spends with Harrison, the more opposed he is to becoming their version of an American. And assimilation has never been about fitting in, it's always been about cultural superiority. I think it's perfectly fine to have an affinity for one nation over another, like that's perfectly normal. I think where it becomes dangerous is when you believe that your identity is superior to others. Harrison wants Lazlo to admit that his culture is inferior by eliminating all traces of it inside of him. He wants Lazlo to depend on him and, more importantly, rely on him for validation. When they first meet, Harrison does not recognize Lazlo's talent because he just does not view them as equals. Lazlo could have painted him the Mona Lisa and Harrison still would have shouted and screamed at him. Unlike Lazlo, his wife Elizabeth takes a more optimistic approach. Like her husband, she refuses to annihilate her own culture. However, she is willing to fight for their place in this society, a country at this point that they have really no choice but to fight for. Elizabeth's presence in his life, as well as his niece, totally alters Lazlo's trajectory. He now comes to the realization that there is no going back. He has to move forward, however painful. The longer the project takes to complete, the more depressed Lazlo becomes. Like, there's no silver lining. His only goal it becomes about finishing this project, any means necessary. Halfway through the construction, there's this massive train accident that forces Harrison to stop the project. His behavior, although understandable, just feels really erratic and petty. And the more time we spend with Harrison, the more selfish and greedy he appears. When the project ends, Lazlo and his wife move to New York and live rather humble lives. And Lazlo never seeks Harrison out after he is fired. He just assumes it's over. When Harrison eventually does reach out to Lazlo, Lazlo jumps at the opportunity. He doesn't even hesitate. His obsession with finishing this project is really concerning to his family, who at this point just want to abandon America and move to Israel. And the movie is not interested in Zionism. It uses Zionism to show how the persecution of a people can fuel hatred. Zionism is like a placebo for the Jewish community. It encourages them to leave America. This place is rotten. There's nothing for you here. You might as well leave. And what's worse, it encourages the Jewish community to think that not only is this place rotten, it's incapable of change. The status quo that Harrison represents will be the status quo forever. And the way that Lazlo's family speaks about Israel as if it's some sort of utopia, a dream place where all their pain will go away. And just because Israel exists, that doesn't mean the movie is suggesting they go there. One thing that really struck me about Lazlo is how important his religion is to him. He constantly goes to the synagogue to seek comfort and solace. And we see moments throughout the film where he's pressured to, if not leave the religion, seek out a new religion for cover, just like his cousin did. And the idea being that this will make it easier for him to fit in, but he never caves in. And I think Lazlo's faith is what inspires him to stay in America and continue the fight, not just for himself, but everyone around him. And one thing I really appreciated about the movie is how he's always redirecting the conversation to being a foreign person, because he recognizes that the pain that he's going through is shared. He recognizes that this fight is not his own. And I believe that it's his faith that enables him to stay grounded and push back against Harrison and not just run away. When Lazlo meets Harrison for the first time after all these years, it's in Italy. Harrison is nowhere near as apologetic as he was at the start of the film. He kind of just talks to Lazlo as if he's an employee. His whole act, he kind of just stops pretending to care. He just wants to finish and move on. And everything about this trip seemed fine until Harrison assaults Lazlo. And this scene took me by surprise. I didn't know what to make of it. My jaw dropped. And this assault completely unravels Lazlo because he feels just as powerless as he did in Europe. And in that moment, Harrison robbed Lazlo of the ability to ever find comfort and security and peace. The assault was most definitely an act of hatred. Harrison hates everything that Lazlo represents. New status quo where he is less powerful and morality has more political capital than money. Lazlo's work has the potential to inspire a new way of thinking, and hopefully trigger a new world order that benefits everyone. Prior to assaulting him, Harrison says, "If your people resent their persecution so much, why do they make themselves such easy targets?" He's basically implying that Lazlo's unwillingness to speak and dress like him justifies the assault. And this is a sentiment that we see today in America regarding immigrants. Being an immigrant does not dilute the rights and protections Lazlo has under the law. He is afforded the same protections Harrison is, and Harrison just hates that. And Harrison assaults him genuinely believing that Lazlo will never have the power or the courage to ever stand up to him. And the same can be said about his son, who likely assaulted his niece. This is kind of hinted at, it's never given. And I think Lazlo's success really does scare the Van Buren family, because they're proof that you can carve out a path, one completely different from their own. And this assault unleashes a fury of hatred that the Van Buren family was not ready for. When Elizabeth finds out that her husband was assaulted, she exposes him like you wouldn't believe. And I felt even before she exposed him to his family and friends, if you watch the scene, she walks into their home with crutches and she refuses help. She's making it clear that she can stand on her own 2 feet. And I thought the act of simply standing there and refusing help and refusing to sit down or really giving them any of these small courtesies was enough to make the Van Buren family feel small and powerless. When Elizabeth exposes Harrison, the Van Buren family does what they do best. His son Harry resorts to violence. Harrison is someone who deeply cares about his public image, and we've seen the way that he panics when he believes that his reputation is at stake. And he is not a man of character. He has spent a lifetime crafting or designing an aesthetic that would make one believe that he is a man of character. but it's just so devoid of who he actually is. And I believe that by confronting Harrison, Erzsébet makes it clear that they are not a people to be tolerated, right? They are a people to be reckoned with. And I feel like this confrontation totally shatters Harrison, and it really exposed him for what he is, a self-serving monster who only cares about money and himself. The movie ends with Lazlo being honored in Europe, a place he never imagined he would come back to, let alone be honored in. The event, titled Presence of the Past, is an exhibit featuring Lazlo's pieces around the world. During a speech meant to honor his legacy, we finally get some insight as to what inspired the design for this community center. The speech is an ode to his designs and uses his traumatic past to show how his resilience makes him brilliant. Lazlo's journey was a very long and painful one. The construction of this community center nearly killed him. At the end, Lazlo's niece thanks Lazlo for speaking up for her all those years, and also really thanks him for allowing her to speak up for him now. In her closing statement, she recalls something her uncle told her: to never let anyone fool you. It's the destination, not the journey. The film then ends with a young Zsófia looking away from the camera after being interrogated and tortured by police. Before arriving to America, Lazlo's joy is actually interrupted by Zsófia's pain. The trauma of having survived a war and losing a mother had rendered her mute. In the opening scene of the film, she's bombarded by questions about where she is from, and the police even question whether or not she understands them at all. They demand that she gives them names and addresses, even though everything she has ever known is likely destroyed. Police constantly probe her with leading questions to prove that she's a foreigner, and they say she bears no resemblance to the native population and even her aunt. They even promise to have mercy on her if she gives in to their assumption. The scene ends with the police reassuring her that their only motivation is to make sure she gets home safe, her true home. Zsófia's speech at the end is a total betrayal of everything Lazlo stood for. We know this because the film does not end with Zsófia looking defiantly at the camera. It ends with a young Zsófia looking down in fear. Lazlo being honored in Europe shows how quickly times have changed and will continue to change. And I think that's why throughout the film we constantly get these shots of Lazlo on the road. Like, the journey is long and never ending. And I think Lazlo's art and this tribute to his art really does highlight this tension between form and substance. The creation of a state does not end the persecution of its people. The focus of Lazlo's work should have been on Lazlo himself, what he believed in, what he was about. He was a man who believed everyone had something to bring to the table. He was also a man who believed that there was strength in diversity. And what's right is always worth struggling for. He survived a system designed to oppress and bent it so out of shape that it now leans a little bit more towards justice than it did before. However, this came at a massive cost. The trauma that nearly killed him also enabled him to heal and connect with people who shared the same struggles. And I think Lazlo's journey shows how God does not change the condition of a people until they change their internal state. And more importantly, none are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe themselves to be free. Lazlo is never under the illusion that changing his accent, compromising on his designs, or going to Israel will bring him peace, because ultimately no one is free until everyone is free. And overall, I think this is a fantastic movie, easily the best movie of the year. And this is a movie worth watching again and again. It should be studied. And I think what I appreciate about this film is it really captures what it means to be an immigrant, that kind of spirit. Like, there's just something so authentic about the way in which he told Lazlo's story that I feel is very universal. And so you guys let me know what you think, and until next time.